Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today I'm going over some very important breaking news out of the state of Minnesota, where the President Donald Trump has officially made an endorsement in the governor's race. Trump has officially endorsed MyPillow CEO and close friend of the president, Mike Lindell, to be the Republican nominee for governor of the state of Minnesota. Now, just to be clear, the primary for Minnesota is still a little bit away. Let's see, the primary here, according to 270towin.com, the Minnesota primary is on August 11th, so we still have a little bit under a month from then for the primary, but President Trump, obviously, his endorsement holds a lot of weight in the Republican primaries. He has now officially endorsed Mike Lindell, who is a close friend of his. Obviously, he supported a lot of his claims about the 2020 election, and Mike Lindell even was propped up by Trump, I think, to run for governor. I want to say in Trump's first term in 2018. Lindell ultimately decides not to run for governor, but he was considering a run back then as well. Lindell is now running, and President Trump gives him his endorsement. So what does this all mean, and why I think this actually probably is pretty good news for the Democrats? I want to explain all in this video. First things first, I want to talk about the Democratic side. So the Democrat, the current governor of the state of Minnesota, is Tim Walz, who, if you're familiar, you'll know he was the vice presidential nominee with Kamala Harris back in the 2024 election. And he was initially running for re-election, and then a lot of scandals broke regarding fraud and Somali fraud in Minnesota. Walz ultimately, not too long after those scandals broke, ended his re-election campaign in January 2026. The primary, as I mentioned, is going to be held on August 11th, but the Democratic side is essentially all locked up now that current U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar has announced she is running in this race. She'll win the Democratic primary, and she'll likely go on to the general election very, very strong and win by a very handed amount. I'll get into the election results in just one moment. So the Republicans, they are no longer going to be facing Tim Walz, who, just to get this out of the way now, Republicans would much rather be facing Tim Walz than Amy Klobuchar. Even back in 2022, Tim Walz won his re-election bid by 7.7% against the Republican Scott Jensen in an election that was a midterm during President Trump's year, though due to the Dobbs decision, it didn't end up being as Republican as Republicans would probably hope. But Walz won by 7.7%. The state of Minnesota voted for Kamala Harris over Donald Trump with Tim Walz on the ticket by only 4.2%. So Minnesota is a state that certainly is very much in the Democratic category, a lean Democratic state, but 2024 showed that if enough movement went in the Republican direction, maybe in the right election environment, it could be like a shock flip, kind of like Virginia's governor's race in 2021. But for 2026, a midterm year where it's going to be a referendum on President Trump and the Republicans, as the party not in charge of the White House often does very well in the midterms. President Trump's approval ratings have gone up a little bit in the last 2 weeks. He's now down about 12.4%. But in Minnesota, a state that voted for Kamala Harris anyway, the governor's race was likely going to be an uphill battle, really either way. But then Amy Klobuchar jumps in the race for governor, where she won in 2024 on that same ballot when Kamala Harris won the state by 4 points. She won by 15.7%. That's about an 11-point overperformance, or really about 11.5% if you want to count the 0.7 over the Republican here over Kamala Harris's performance. And you can even go back to 2018 as well, where Tina Smith, the Democrat, won the special election by 10.6% in the first Trump midterm. Amy Klobuchar won by 24 points. Amy Klobuchar is a very formidable candidate in the state of Minnesota. She's certainly an overperformer compared to like a generic Democrat in the state. And the Republicans really don't really have much of a shot in this governor's race anyway. Now, on the Republican side, though, there are a lot of candidates running. Some of the more notable ones you may know are Lisa DeMuth, the Speaker of the Minnesota House of Representatives, Mike Lindell, the founder and CEO of MyPillow, Kendall Qualls, the candidate for the 3rd District in 2020. A candidate that withdrew was Scott Jensen, who was the candidate or the Republican nominee in 2022 for governor, was running again. He then withdrew from the race and is now running for state auditor in the state of Minnesota. So those are, I would say, the 3 main candidates now: Kendall Qualls, Mike Lindell, and Lisa DeMuth. Though with Trump's endorsement, this could essentially put the primary to bed, as most cases obviously can point to Georgia and Iowa where it didn't go the candidate that Trump endorsed way, but a majority of the time, the candidate that Trump's endorsed seems to win the primaries by a very good amount. The current polling data from Big Data Poll on June 26th through 29th, which is sponsored by Lindell's campaign, showed Lindell at about 25%, Lisa DeMuth at 20%, Kendall Qualls at 10%, but still 34% of the vote ultimately undecided. So what does this all mean? Does this mean Mike Lindell is now like for sure going to win the primary? You can't always say that for sure because primaries can always be unpredictable. There's a lot of undecided vote left, but I think Mike Lindell probably has a very strong chance at winning this primary. Now, here's where things get interesting. The Minnesota Republican Party held a caucus straw poll in terms of which candidates to support in their primary, which took place, I think it was last month. No, I'm sorry, on February 3rd. It was even further than that. Lisa DeMuth ended up finishing in first place at 31.86% of the vote. Kendall Qualls finished second, 25.28%. Mike Lindell finished in third at 17.69%. Scott Jensen, 6.48%. That could be why he switched to running for state auditor, was he didn't see there was a path. And Mike Lindell gave an impassioned speech at that Minnesota state convention where he said he pretty much expected not to win the nomination of the Minnesota Republican Party and essentially like spit in their face and said, yeah, I'm running for this primary anyway. I'm not dropping out because you don't like me. I don't really care that you don't like me. Obviously, that didn't go over well with Republican Party insiders in Minnesota, and they released a statement today saying that they disagree with President Trump's endorsement of Mike Lindell, even though they're supportive of the president. But Mike Lindell has the support of the president, and in a primary, that holds a lot of weight. So what happens now? Well, it's possible that Lisa DeMuth or Kendall Qualls could pull up the upset over Mike Lindell. I would imagine most of the Trump vote goes to Lindell now. DeMuth and Qualls are splitting the remaining vote, and I think that ends up with Lindell winning by like a 10 to 15% margin of victory. So I think Mike Lindell, at this current point in time, very likely to win the Republican primary. Now for the general election. Safe Democrat for most of the rankings. Only Inside Elections has it as likely Democrat. But let's just take a quick look at some of the polling here. Because again, Amy Klobuchar, very strong election overperformer in a midterm election year where Donald Trump is president. The writing's kind of on the wall already. But for Klobuchar versus DeMuth from the Mason-Dixon polling strategy, which is commissioned by the Hubbard School of Journalism and Mass Communication, KARE11 in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, shows Klobuchar at 48, Lisa DeMuth 40%, but still 12% undecided. And honestly, given Klobuchar's track record, that's not a terrible place for the Republicans to start out. They're probably not going to win this race no matter what. But I'll explain why it's important in just a minute, but it's not a bad place to start out with Lisa DeMuth. Emerson College has Klobuchar at 51, DeMuth at 38, down about 13 points against Klobuchar. And then Survey USA from back in January had Klobuchar at 49, DeMuth at 34. That's more concerning. You're down about 15 points with 17% undecided already. Now let's look at some of these numbers for Mike Lindell versus Amy Klobuchar. Klobuchar starts out at 53, so 5 points higher than against DeMuth, and Lindell's at 36, 4 points lower than DeMuth's 40%, with 11% undecided. So only 1% is more or less undecided in this one than the prior one, but that means about 3% or so, or 4% of Lindell's support ultimately goes to Klobuchar in that. That's obviously not something Republicans that support Lindell are going to want to see. For the Emerson poll, 51 to 38 versus DeMuth, 53-31 against Lindell, with 5 more percent saying they are undecided, up to 16%. Survey USA, it was about a 15-point margin in this poll for Klobuchar versus Lindell, 20-point margin. Klobuchar versus Kendall Qualls. Qualls is kind of in between DeMuth and Lindell in terms of the margins here. He's trailing to Klobuchar in the Mason-Dixon poll by about 11 points, trailing in the Survey USA poll by about, 16 points. So a little bit worse than DeMuth, but a little bit better than Lindell as well. The early polling, obviously, we know how polling can be, where sometimes it's correct, sometimes it's off, but early on, it's very clear all three polls show a consistent trend that Mike Lindell is the weaker of the three Republican candidates, and nominating him for the general election would essentially be a mistake if Republicans want to try not even to win, but to be more competitive. Because let's be honest, it's Amy Klobuchar in the state of Minnesota in a President Trump midterm. The Republicans were not winning this race anyway. No disrespect to any of the three candidates. They just weren't going to win a Democratic state in a Democratic midterm year. But the margins do matter. Sort of like a similar conversation we're having in the state of Pennsylvania as well. We can look at the House map, down ballot effects in the state of Minnesota. We can even look at the Senate race as well, where it's going to be an open race. Now that we know Tina Smith is not running for re-election, Republicans are running Michelle Tafoya, who is honestly probably the strongest Republican candidate that's going to be on the ticket with Mike Lindell there. Is Michelle Tafoya going to win that Senate race? Once again, no. But Will her margin of victory be smaller than the governor's race? 100%. Does it matter so much for the Senate race and the governor's race? Not really, but down ballot it could. The House map for 2024 showed the Republicans winning in the 8th district, the 7th district, and the 1st district, all by 15 points or more. The 2nd district voted for Angie Craig by 13.5%. In 2022, this is what the map looked like. The 8th district was 14.5%, the 1st district 11.5%, the 7th and the 6th were safe Republican. Are these districts going to flip in 2026 if Mike Lindell is at the top of the ticket? I personally don't think so, but at very least, could the 8th district and the 1st district fall under 15 points once again and maybe get into like toss up to lean Republican category where the House GOP has to spend resources to hold these districts because Lindell could be such a big drag on the ticket? That, I would say, is not too unrealistic. For the House rankings right now, on 270win.com, the 1st district's already listed as likely Republican. Could Lindell be enough of a drag where they both go to lean Republican? I'm not sure, but I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. So this news for 2026, it doesn't impact my ranking for the governor's ratings. I had it as safe Democrat for Amy Klobuchar anyway, and I'm keeping it as safe Democrat for Amy Klobuchar. But for the House races, it could be something to monitor that Lindell being the candidate could make the Democrats potentially able to make the 8th district and the 1st district become more competitive. I don't know if they flip. I don't think they do. But the margin of victory can certainly be a lot lower, and that may present a scenario where the Republicans could be in danger in 2 House seats that should normally be safe Republican, which, as we know, not everything happens in a vacuum. If Republicans are pulling in more resources than they have to in Minnesota, well, then that could hurt them in the state right next door in Wisconsin, where they're holding a very close House race in the 3rd district with Derek Van Orden. These kind of things can happen in very close elections. So for what I think for Minnesota, again, the governor's race rating doesn't change, but Mike Lindell being the Republican nominee potentially is certainly welcome news to the Democrats. And I think for President Trump, it's a situation of he knows it's not going to be a Republican win no matter what, so he's probably just supporting his longtime friend and one of his oldest supporters since he started running in 2016. But in terms of the general election and down ballot effects, this is certainly, I would argue, bad news for the Republicans. I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are, though. Leave them all down in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to hit like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in a future video.